Hey, everybody. Welcome to another edition of the Music Podcast. And today we are going to be discussing the 8-track format, and in particular, rare 8 tracks. I'm joined today by producer Shane in Boston. Hey, Shane, how's it going?
Hey, man, how you doing?
I'm great. How are you?
Great.
So today we're going to delve into the world of 8-track collection. Why don't you give the viewers a Cliff Notes version of what's so special or significant about 8 tracks?
Well, the 8-track format is one of my favorites because it's, as they say, it's so bad it's good. It's a largely forgotten format worldwide. It was a more of a U.S.-based, U.S., Canada, and some select European country popular format for cars. It originally had come out, the initial player in the market in 1964 by Bill Lear, was one of the early pioneers in terms of the vision of the 8-track tape from the Lear Jet Corporation, which maybe you've heard of. And they struck a deal with the U.S. car manufacturers in the early 60s to include this format, which made music portable more or less for the first time. Although there were compact cassettes out, they weren't used for commercial music. You know, prior to that, really, it was vinyl. Therefore, mobile music, you were limited to the radio, and you really couldn't bring any sort of personal music collection on the road with you. But one of the reasons I like the format so much, outside of the fact that it's a very clunky, unorthodox format in terms of sequencing, sound, is just, like I said, the overall, how they're so obscure, and how versus vinyl in the current market in 2020, the rarity and what some of these tapes are going for at auction are just astronomical and very interesting to me personally.
Yeah, and just quickly, we'll talk about the mechanics of an 8-track, just to give you a basic overview. So the tape is comprised of 8 channels or 8 tracks, and the tape head will play 2 at a time. So you'll have 2 tracks, and thus your stereo experience, the left and right channel. The other thing is that the tape is basically a big loop, which has a metal sensing strip that allows for the determination of when the program begins and when it ends. It creates the possibility to listen to a record basically on loop play.
And that's another reason why I really like it. It's a great format for the summertime. Now, this is a TNT model that came out in the 70s, where you can change programs. 8 tracks consist of 4 programs of equal length. It's around 11 and a half minutes, which results in a really unique sequencing of songs and timing of songs. What I mean by that is you could be on a specific program and you could be listening to Beat It by Michael Jackson. And due to the fact that the 4 programs are equal in length, you don't have the flexibility in terms of having the song go through one program into another. So if the sequencing of the album is set up that way, you'll be going along listening to the Michael Jackson song, and about halfway through, in most cases, you'll hear a big clunk. It'll change programs, and the song will fade back in, and you'll usually get the last minute or so.
Yeah.
So that's one of those things that makes it so bad that, for, geeks like myself, you almost are gravitated towards it. But the continuous loop is great. It's really fun in the summertime to take an 8-track in the age of streaming and be able to throw a tape in and have it be on continuous loop outside, pool, reading a book. That's why I still like the format.
And another thing that may perhaps contribute to the reason that people started taking an interest in 8 tracks is that in the, let's say, early to mid 80s, when that format was being phased out, in favor of cassettes or LPs and then later CDs, there was a big push to clear out the inventory. So you could go into a store, right, and find 8-tracks available for next to nothing, even if they were brand new, it's still wrapped. So in the 90s, when it was fairly expensive to buy a brand new CD, it might have cost, $16 to $20 for a new CD. You could go to a thrift shop or a record shop that sold old secondhand 8-tracks, and you could buy, potentially, 5 for $1 in some cases.
Which I did in the 80s. Unfortunately, by the 90s, a lot of them ended up in landfills. The format was really, but there's been a resurgence in recent years, of course, with eBay and people, having things that was once thought to be completely obsolete. But that's a prime example. I'll give you an example. We used to buy Kiss records all the time, and a lot of our discussions center around our Kiss collection and Kiss fandom. Unlike the records that we discussed previously in Kiss and their marketing scheme, that typically loaded their audio products with goodies, posters, memorabilia, mail away. The 8-tracks, in most cases, never offered anything like that. But as a young Kiss fan, where I could go into the local department store and buy it, I bought this in 1981. And just as you said, it was 5 for $1 for the Kiss album Double Platinum, which was a 2-record set. It's sealed, not terribly valuable. They really overproduced during this era of the 70s. So it's really not worth much, but it's sealed. I was too young. I didn't have an 8-track player. But just the fact that it had a Kiss logo on it, I still purchased it, but never had a way or reason to play them. Now I have a copy that I can play, and then a copy that's technically a collectible.
That's one of the memories that I have from maybe being 8 or 9 years old. There was a mall where we grew up called the Pyramid Mall, and within that mall was a grocery store called the PNC, of all places. They had a bin filled with 8-tracks that were clearly being sold at a huge discount. And I remember being able to find copies of the Kiss solo records. They had all of them, and each one was 25 cents.
Yeah, and the Kiss solo albums in 1978, that's another example where the vinyl versions came with big posters and all sorts of things, but the 8-tracks did not come with anything. But here's one of the Kiss solo albums. This is Peter Criss, sealed. Once again, a little overproduced. Kiss overrun really everything to do with the solo albums, their cassette version, the 8-track version, and the vinyl version. So all formats really ended up ultimately in budget bins by the early 80s.
Right.
But
so in terms of rarity or scarcity, there's nothing rare about the Kiss solo albums in terms of 8-track.
Yes, that would be true. And that's fair to say for really most of the Kiss catalog. The exceptions to that would be the first album, the self-titled album that came out in 1974. Okay. There were 2 pressings of this record. The initial pressing that kicked off with the song Strutter. The album out of the gate didn't sell very well, so they decided to send Kiss back into the studio to record a cover of a song called Kissin' Time. And this was part of a kissing contest that the record company kind of drummed up for publicity, a nationwide kissing contest in stores. If you think about it these days, it's just ridiculous. But the majority of the copies of both the vinyl and the 8-track that came out include Kissing Time.
I see.
So in terms of early 70s Kiss, the only 8-track that's really rare is a copy of the Kiss self-titled album without Kissing Time.
I see.
In terms of Kiss, their 8-tracks really, like many, the scarcity and the value are in the early to mid 80s releases that were only available through record clubs. Because in 1982, the music industry completely abandoned the format and switched over to compact cassettes. only in terms of retail stores. However, for probably 3, 4, even 5 years in some cases, 8-tracks were still available through Record Club. And those were those ads you would see in a magazine where you could get 13 albums for 1 cent. And then,
Right,
you were kind of suckered into a membership where you would pay twice the retail value for one single record, and it was a bit of a scam. But think about this. By the mid-'80s, everyone has cassettes. Most people that are ordering through Record Club in the 80s are buying cassettes.
Yeah.
So who in 1984 or 85, can you imagine, is using this format still? Hardly anybody. And then with the Record Club, you would have to choose 13 of the same formats. Not like you could take, hey, I'll take a Kiss 8-track, a Motley Crue cassette, and a Michael Jackson album. You had to take 13. So although they were available through Columbia House as late as 87 or 88, the last Kiss release was their 1984 album Animalize. And in terms of Kiss 8-track collectibles, this is the hardest to find. And this is a sealed version of their 1984 album Animalize. And in terms of Kiss 8-track collectibles, this is really, I use this word all the time, but the holy grail.
Okay.
However, Kiss fans that are listening, their 1983 album, Lick It Up, is really the only one I've been unable to acquire. So a case could be made that that's, the rarest of all, because I haven't been able to find it. So if anyone out there has one or knows of one, certainly drop us a line or a message. But that would be the same, since we're on the Kiss topic here, their 1982 album, Creatures of the Night, and their 1981 release, Music from the Elder, and here's the sealed copy as well, are very rare. But
I don't think I've ever seen a copy of the Elder on 8-track. That's really interesting.
Yeah, it sounds wonderful. But the 83 and 84 are really hard to find. There's also, for the hardcore Kiss fans that might know, in 1980, Peter Criss left Kiss and was able to release one solo album through Casablanca Records, which was the Kiss record label in 1980. So he put out a solo album called Out of Control. And that would be, in terms of scarcity, the Animalize and Lick It Up are going to be the most rare, followed up by Creatures of the Night, The Elder, a self-titled version of Kissing Time, self-titled version of the record without Kissing Time, and then the Peter Criss.
I see.
Because even the cassette format is fairly valuable, because Casablanca really wanted to fulfill this contractual obligation to Peter Criss and make him disappear. So the album was really, buried by the record label. They didn't want really any sort of solo success or any sort of distraction from the Kiss machine, which is their primary band. So the 8-track version of that in Kiss circles is pretty sought after.
So is it safe to say that after Creatures of the Night, that's when the 8-track, the Kiss 8-tracks were primarily available through the record clubs and nowhere else?
Right. Starting officially in 1982 with Creatures of the Night.
I see.
Like you couldn't go into a record store and buy Creatures of the Night. Apparently you could with The Elder, but Creatures of the Night, Lick It Up, and Animalize were exclusively sold through Columbia House. Hence the rarity.
And in terms of some other rock bands or hard rock bands, are there rarities or rare 8-tracks that collectors are seeking or hope to acquire through whether it's eBay or secondhand record shops? Not that many exist anymore.
Well, I think the nature of hard rock and heavy metal fans in general, the diehard nature in which they follow their bands, have made, and that's why I like to talk about these specific releases, are the hard rock heavy metal releases of the early to mid 80s, they have become some of the most valuable pieces of audio format that you can actually buy, more than vinyl. To give you an example, bands like Ratt, bands like Motley Crue, bands like Iron Maiden, Crocus, a little lesser known band. But last week or 2 weeks ago, a copy of the 1985 album Ratt, Invasion of Your Privacy, sold for over $1,000 on eBay. That's a staggering amount for a format that the reality is you can buy it sealed, and just due to the very nature of it, you can't really play it because or open it, it's going to decrease the value. And the reality is you're going to put it into your machine, and most likely, it is dried out, or the head at the very least, and it's not going to play. But I mean, the sealed copy from Columbia House of $1,000, $1,200, Iron Maiden, Motley Crue's 1984 album, Shout at the Devil, very valuable. I mean, I couldn't believe it. But those are some of the bands that really are drawing the most in terms of high auction.
And is this because hard rock fans tend to want to complete their collection in all formats? Is that what drives up the price of these rare 8-tracks?
In my opinion, all I can use is myself as a reference, and that's what I decided to do. For some reason, in 2009, I decided having 5 copies on vinyl, cassettes, CDs, remastered CDs, re-released vinyl. All of a sudden, I decided that a complete 1974 to 1984 sealed KISS collection was a mission of mine in terms of the 8-track format, and a copy that I could have as a collectible, and a copy that I could actually use. I purchased a couple of players, a really nice desktop recorder that I was able to run out to some modern audio system to give it some really nice bottom end. Although, as we have discussed, the format itself, sonically, there's a lot of hiss. The tracks will sometimes bleed due to the very nature of how the channels are set up, and the fact that most players, their heads are not aligned properly, so you'll get bleeding from other tracks. So that's, for those that don't know what that means, you're going to potentially hear 2 songs at once. And another, outside of hard rock, some of the this is one of my treasures, for lack of a better term, is the 1973 debut by Buckingham Nicks, and that's Stevie Nicks and Lindsey Buckingham. This was prior to them joining Fleetwood Mac. This was a solo album that didn't do particularly well, but caught the attention of the folks in Fleetwood Mac, and they obviously joined forces a couple of years later with a second version of the band and became household names. But that's one of my favorites in terms of both the songs, the look. It's hard to tell online, but it's red, and it's in pretty good condition. One thing about 8-tracks, because they were typically used in cars, and the cheap glue, there are usually bubbles on the cover. And this is a really pristine copy for the most part. That still sounds great. I'm gonna have to listen to it later when I take a lunch break. But overall, yes, it's going to be some select artists from the 70s and those 80s Columbia House that are going to command the most money. And even certain popular artists like David Bowie or Lou Reed, bands or artists that have this sort of like cult following, those are the most valuable 8-tracks.
You had mentioned and sent me a link, which I'll put in the description, about a documentary called "So Wrong They're Right," which is a look into the world of 8-track collecting, and it's very interesting. One of the things that stood out in terms of the topic of Kiss is that one collector mentioned that there's 25 Kiss albums that are fairly easy to find on 8-track, and then there's 3 that are not. You've covered some of that during our discussion today, which was very insightful.
Yeah, I mean, the other ones are really relatively easy to find. Like, this is a sealed version of Love Gun.
Mm-hmm.
And this was really at the height of, 8-track output by record labels in 1977. I mean, the format was starting to die out a little bit. They were producing mass amounts. So on certain Kiss collectible websites and eBay, for instance, you could buy boxes of these, boxes, a few years ago. And it might come out to like $20 a piece or $15 a piece in bulk. But these were readily available, especially a few years ago.
In terms of your own personal collection, outside of Kiss, would you say that the Stevie Nicks, Lindsey Buckingham is your most valued rare 8-track, or do you have another one?
I don't know if it's terribly valuable. I think it was around $100. Another one that I have that is really rare is the 1981 album Killers by Iron Maiden.
Oh, okay.
And if anyone is familiar with the heavy metal band Iron Maiden, I mean, much like Kiss, their branding is really known worldwide in terms of their logo, their mascot, Eddie, and he's featured on all their iconic releases. And the cover of Killers, I don't have it with me, is just such an incredible cover. And the fact that Iron Maiden just has this rabid worldwide fan base makes that really sought after as well. I think it's also important to mention some of the 8-tracks in my collection are actually relatively new releases. So you have some bands. There's a classic band from the 70s called Cheap Trick. This is a copy of their 2009 album called The Latest, which they released on 8-track. And it happened to be number one in 8-track sales that week. Pretty brilliant. But I've seen other bands, once again, mostly in the hard rock heavy metal genre, release albums in the last couple of years on 8-track format, and they sell out immediately. Probably the best example of that is a band called Ghost. Ghost is a European band, very, very popular, very theatrical. They're one of my favorite modern bands, so to speak. But their latest album was released on 8-track, and I couldn't get a copy of it. It sold out in like a day, and it's been on back order ever since. So I wanted to get that. But occasionally you do have new bands still releasing in the format, which is hard to believe. Well,
clearly there's a demand for it, at least among hard rock fans, which is really interesting.
Yeah, select hard rock fans. I mean, vinyl obviously is the rage again, with folks rebuying. I think that's maybe a push by the labels, just, with everything streaming, to just sell you something again. But certainly in my world, and certain, forums and websites that I watch and watching, the top selling 8-tracks of the week or the month. It's a fun community. And although that particular movie, So Wrong They're Right, is 25 years old and almost pre-internet, I think if you're interested in the format, it's worth a watch. It kind of gets into some, it's a low budget production, but certainly gets into the history a little bit in a little bit more detail, the format in a little bit more detail. It's a fun watch.
I guess the final point or question that I would raise is, for somebody who's interested in researching 8-tracks or seeking out vintage copies of releases by bands or artists that they follow, what's the best place to start?
I would say 8-track heaven, or if you're just looking for titles in general, I mean, you could just type it into eBay.
Okay.
And browse around. Many times 8-tracks are sold in lots. Actually, that's how I obtained my copy of Animalize. Is it was sold with other 8-tracks and some other Kiss merchandise. And I happened to look closely, and there was a copy of sealed copy of Animalize.
Wow.
I don't think the person knew what they had. Upon receiving that particular shipment from eBay, I took everything besides the Animalize 8-track and just threw it away. And, you know, kept the 8-track, of course. I mean, that's the whole reason I bought the lot. But many times you'll see, you know, things sold in, you know, 20, pick 40, pick 50. Although it was, you know, believed that many of these ended up in landfills, which is true. Many of them survived and are out there.
In people's attics or basements. Yeah.
Yeah, case in point right here.
Anyway, well, I hope you guys have enjoyed this episode that addressed 8-tracks. We will be back soon with another follow-up episode. Have a great week, and we'll talk to you soon. Thank you.